is Histories and Mysteries Uncovered. I'm Ashley.
And I'm Jessica. And on this week's episode, Ashley will be talking about the AIDS epidemic and patient zero.
Yep.
And I will be talking about the thalidomide tragedy.
Oh.
Do you know anything about that?
I have no idea. I've never heard of it.
Okay. I also didn't know anything about it, but thank you to TikTok. Um I saw like a little piece of an episode from Call the Midwife, and one of the children that was born was from the thalidomide epidemic. So
Oh, it was funny today. I messaged Jessica and I was like, "Oh, I'm doing the AIDS epidemic and focusing on patient zero." And I was like, "It's pretty rough." And she's like, "Oh, I'm doing this one." And I was like, "Why are we the way that we are?"
yeah, this was not planned.
Yeah, it's gonna be a pretty. At least I know my story is pretty sad, pretty dark, and yeah.
Yeah, mine is sad just in regards to what happened, but it's also very history based.
Okay.
A lot of facts. But I found it really interesting. So I hope you all do too.
Yay. So before we start, we wanted to mention our Patreon again. If you would like to support us, feel free to head over to our Patreon. We have one tier right now for $3 a month. It's called the Smoked Ham. Jessica thought it was hilarious, so we decided to keep it.
I really did.
So if you want to head over there and support us, we would love it.
Yes, please.
So I do have to say, I got this idea for my story from another podcast called True Crime Obsessed, which I've talked about on here before. They go over different documentaries. And one of the documentaries they talked about was called Killing Patient Zero. And it was really, really interesting, really sad, but really interesting. So I kind of thought that since it was Pride Month, which unfortunately got away from me, and this won't be coming out until July. It'll be July 2nd when this comes out. But it is June right now. I thought I would do this story because it's a big turning point for the gay community. And I really wanted to do this during Pride Month. And I really apologize that it got away from me. I hope you guys can forgive me, but I still wanted to do it. And so I got some of my information from that documentary. I watched part of it. I also got from Healthline, the British Academy, HIV.gov, National Prevention Information Network, and the CDC.
Okay.
All right. Gaëtan Dugas was born on February 19th, 1952 in Quebec City, Quebec. Yes, Quebec. I'm looking at the words right now, Jessica.
I would hope Quebec City was in Quebec.
Yes. Anyway, he was a gay man during the height of the AIDS epidemic. So he was a gay man. I said during the height of the AIDS epidemic, but he really was more in the beginning. Before they kind of really knew what it was and what was going on, but right when it was starting to really come into public play. And he quickly became the villain. He was quoted as people said that he was irresponsible, sexually promiscuous, a heathen gay man spreading AIDS willy-nilly. One book even called him a sociopath.
What?
Yes.
Everybody, well, I mean, not everybody, but you know, I don't know where I was going with that, but it just pisses me off.
Yes. And to be clear, Gaëtan was very sexually active. He claimed to have about 250 partners a year. He was a flight attendant, so he kind of had different partners all across the country, but that's his prerogative, and we don't slut shame, and your worth is not wrapped up in your number. If you like sex, fucking have sex, baby.
I thought my number was high.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
is, and you mean 250 a year?
a year. Yeah, and I mean he was a young guy. He was very nice looking. He was a
Oh
flight
yeah,
attendant.
I'm
It was like,
impressed,
yeah, like
honestly.
yeah, and it was they one of the things they said is it was really becoming a time when gay men could be gay and they could be out with their sexuality. I mean, it was still hard and it was still, you know, not great, but they were starting to build their own community.
Yeah, no, I'm impressed.
Yeah. So Gaëtan was, I want to, his name was Gaëtan, and I keep saying Gaëtan because that's like my Midwestern accent, but Gaëtan was
Gaetan. Sorry.
Gaëtan,
Gate what?
Gaëtan, that's his name. Gaëtan
Gaetan?
Dugas. It's a French name, I guess, because, Quebec City. Gaëtan. He was diagnosed with AIDS in the early 1980s. During this time, there was an estimated 20,000 infections in 1981, and this peaked to 130,400 between 1984 and 1985. AIDS first appeared in the early 1980s, but obviously it wasn't understood. Between October 1980 and May of 1981, 5 young gay men were being treated for, and I pulled this word for word, biopsy confirmed pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. I'm sure I butchered that. But they were being treated for that in LA. And it was a rare life-threatening disease that usually only affected people with compromised immune systems. So it was really weird that all of a sudden there was like 5 people with this because it was super rare. They were in the same place, same time. By the publication of the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report on June 5th, 1981, 2 of the young men had already died. This was the first report that it would be known as AIDS. So this was like the first report of, at the time, they still didn't call it AIDS yet, but it was the first report of there's something wrong of AIDS. They just didn't know that that's what it was. By July 3rd of that year, there was a number of people that reported to have Kaposis sarcoma. I know I'm butchering that one as well. And yes, I did hear it in the documentary. And yes, it's still really hard.
You're doing fabulous.
Thank you. So the again, the men were in the hospital May of 1981. By July 3rd of that year, so like 2 months later, the number of people reported to have this Kaposis sarcoma and pneumocystis pneumonia had already increased to 26, and they were all gay men. So within 2 months. And
Wow.
Kaposis sarcoma is the red like sores that people with AIDS get. And again, it's something that's rare. So they're like, what is going on? What are these sores? And that's kind of how people started to be able to recognize that if you have these sores, you have this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to point out for everybody to remember that HIV is the virus and AIDS is the disorder that happens because of the HIV virus. So it wasn't until September 24th, 1982 that doctors first used the term AIDS. At this point, it was estimated that there was 106,000 people living with HIV and 64,900 new cases of HIV infections. But still, no one really knew what it was or what was causing it. One doctor in the documentary said that 96% of the people he saw for it died.
What?
Yeah. He said it was almost, at that point, it was almost like total, like if you have it, it's basically a death sentence.
Oh, that's terrible.
Because they didn't know. They didn't know anything about it.
It was so new.
Yeah. And it wasn't until January 11th, 1985. So again, those first 5 people showed up in 1981. It wasn't until 85 that they realized that AIDS was caused by HIV. So they didn't even understand what was causing AIDS at this point.
Who figured that out?
Doctors. I didn't write down the names.
That's where I find that you and I are very different with our researching. Like I'm like, oh, that's a question I would have. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to make sure I have the answer for Ashley.
Well, with this one especially, there were so many people involved and so many facts. I
Yeah,
tried not to bog it down too much, but I should have gotten that name.
that's
But
okay.
1985 was kind of what they considered, well, so the height of the AIDS epidemic when it was the worst was 1987 to 1996. This is when it was really bad. But in 1985, more people were diagnosed with AIDS than all of the earlier years combined. There was an 89% increase in new AIDS cases.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So between that 1987 and 1996, there was an estimated 324,029 people died. That's 36,003 people per year, every year for 9 years.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. And the majority of these deaths were 25 to 44-year-old gay men. On March 19th, 1987, the FDA finally approved the use of AZT to help treat AIDS. And it helped, but it obviously didn't cure. We can't cure viruses, right? Nowadays, I know I follow actually this one lady on TikTok who has HIV and she's on medication for it, antivirals and stuff. And her count is basically so low that it's non-existent. Her doctor said she cannot spread it at this point. The count is so low. You can't say it's cured because the virus is still in her,
Hmm.
but she basically doesn't have it. So nowadays, prognosis is great, you know.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope that they would be able to come up with something in however many years, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like 20 years,
yeah,
40 years? We're starting like the 80s, right?
yeah, 80s.
Yeah, it's like 40 years.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, because I'm almost 40.
No, you are not.
I'm
You're
37 this
such
year. I was born in 86.
sucks for you. That fucking sucks, Ash. I'm sorry.
I'm almost halfway to death. I'm planning on living to at least 80.
I would sure hope so.
And not to bring light into this, but to make it a little bit lighter. If any of you are a fan of the musical Rent, they talk about AZT in it. They have an AZT break. Just throwing that out there. I'm obsessed with Rent. I love it so much. All right, back to the sad stuff. But by 1995, 1 in every 9 gay men had been diagnosed with AIDS, and 1 in 15 had died.
Wow.
10% or 100, no, 1,600,000 men aged 25 to 44 who identified as gay had died.
Over a million.
Yeah,
Wow.
almost 2 million.
Do you know, it's gonna sound like a silly question, but did they ever kind of figure out what the correlation was between the gay men getting it?
Um, we're gonna kind of get into that.
Okay.
I mean, there's not. I think there's like a couple things that play into that, and we'll talk about them in a little bit.
Okay.
It was published early on that AIDS affected minority populations such as Black, Latino, and gay men more than other populations. The stigma around this disorder and gay men was awful. In fact, before they had named it AIDS, they called it gay-related immune deficiency or GRID. In the very beginning, they also called it the gay cancer. Uh,
Oh,
yeah. In 1983, Dr. Joseph Sonnabend in New York was threatened with eviction for treating people who had HIV. Some schools didn't allow children with HIV to attend school. In 1985, men who had sex with men were banned from donating blood, which didn't change until 2015.
I was gonna say, wasn't that like a recent?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. One man was sick in the hospital and the food worker refused to go into his room. He would just set his tray outside. They wouldn't let their partners say goodbye to them as they lay dying in bed in the hospital because people didn't like gay people at this time. Sometimes they wouldn't even let them go to their funerals of their partners.
What the? Why?
Like if the family was mad
Oh,
and blamed like the partner or something, you know?
but it takes two to tango. And you know
Yeah.
what? Like they were probably a better family than you were. So
Yeah.
fuck off.
Yep.
Ugh, makes me
People in the
angry.
media suggested tattooing HIV on people who had it or putting them all in a camp. People would say that people living with HIV or AIDS were immoral. And President Reagan was silent on the topic.
Oh, of course.
In fact, in 1982, the press secretary of the White House was asked about it in a press conference. And he made a joke of it and like laughed, and everybody about it laughed. And the reporter said, he's like, 1 in 3 people are dying.
Yeah.
And the guy was like, well, I don't have it, do you? Ha 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 ha. And he's like, so what you're saying is the White House views this as a joke.
What the actual?
Yeah.
Did we not like Reagan or was Reagan okay other than this
I
little?
honestly don't know. I don't know
Okay.
about Reagan. But he finally did address the topic in 1985. But I mean, the epidemic is well underway at this point.
Yeah.
Um, one of the men in the documentary, this was really sad. So I have this quote. Um, or no, I'm sorry, this was from the man who made the documentary. He said, some gay men I interviewed for my British Academy funded study into the social world of older gay men who had lost friends and or partners to the AIDS epidemic described cities becoming virtually ghost towns. At the epidemic's height, caring for a partner with AIDS meant spending significant time in hospitals, hospice, or at home when not at work if they were still working. Returning to the world after a partner's death was often a return to a world in which many, if not most, of these survivors' gay male friends had disappeared. Recovery from a partner's death occurred in both a vastly shrunken social network and a devastated community. So, all of this is to say that it was horrible and confusing and unknown to many how this virus spreads. Like they didn't know. They had their guess, you know, but this all brings us back to Gaëtan Dugas. Friends described him as one guy in the documentary described him as a man on the glittering edge, flamboyantly definitively and happily gay, seeming unconcerned with what others thought.
Oh,
I love that.
that
I know.
glittery side.
I know. But and amazingly, the time that Gaëtan grew up in was not okay to be gay, right? I mean, when he was growing up, you could still go to jail for it. In fact, there was a documentary that aired on TV that one of the men being interviewed in this documentary remembered. And it had a gay man on there, and he had already been arrested 3 times for homosexual acts. And if he was arrested again, he could have spent his life in prison. So, like, it was not okay. But thankfully, when Gaëtan came out, his family was really supportive of him. They weren't mean, they didn't disown him. So that was really good. And for Gaëtan, this kind of all started when the CDC started a study on 3 gay men who were all in the hospital in LA with the same sickness and had all had sex with one another. Like they had all been each other's partners at some point in time. And all 3 of them could trace their sexual history back to Gaëtan. So William Darrow from the CDC went to speak with him, and unfortunately at this time Gaëtan had just gone through a round of chemotherapy because they still thought that it was some kind of cancer. So he had just gone through a round of chemotherapy. He didn't have any hair. And William Darrow said that he was nervous about his condition, but was extremely willing to help. He even gave names of his past partners from a little black book. And William said that if everyone they had talked to had something like this, they probably would have been able to figure things out much sooner than they had. So he was very cooperative.
That's good.
Yeah. And at this point, he was going to several different public health officials to help them kind of figure this disease out, figure out what was going on. And at the time, again, it was still being called the gay cancer, because this is going to be back in like 1981, 82 type of time frame.
I still hate that. That's like,
I know.
why?
I know.
Because, but that's the thing though, like straight people can get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So at the time, Dr. Selma Dritz told him that he shouldn't be having sex and that he was getting other people sick. And he said, it's my right to do whatever I want. It's my civil rights. He basically said, prove to me how this disease is transmitted, and then I'll figure out what I want to do from there. And when I first heard this, I was kind of like, oh, wow, that's kind of crazy that he wouldn't just be like, oh, man, okay.
A little ballsy.
Yeah. But one of the people in the documentary explained that it wasn't until the 1970s that being gay was taken out of the medical books as a psychological disorder. And a lot of gay men, probably including Gaëtan, were afraid that by doctors telling them what they could or couldn't do with their sexual lives, it would push being gay back into the arms of healthcare system, where they had just stopped trying to cure them.
Yeah.
Plus, at the time, conservatives were using this against homosexuality. They were basically using it as a way to say, like, see, you're having to pay for your sinful ways. AIDS is affecting you because you're gay and you're sinning, and this is going to get you. And one guy even said that he came out to a family member and they said, well, that's okay because AIDS will get you.
What?
Yeah, it was bad.
That's horrendous.
Yeah.
And then it's those families that think that they have the right to keep
Yeah, exactly.
the partner away. Like,
yeah,
are you freaking kidding me?
it's awful.
Just let your people live their lives.
Yeah. And according to Gaëtan's friends, at this point, he wasn't having casual sex at bathhouse anymore because according to his friend, he had told him that he had gotten some things that were hard to get rid of from people at the bathhouse. And he's like, I'm not doing that anymore. But he did, and this is another quote that I took directly. It says, Dugas continued having sex even after fears of the gay cancer that would later become known as HIV or AIDS rattled the community. But at the time, there was still no conclusive proof that it was passed through sexual intercourse. And many men had a fatalistic view, assuming it would get them eventually, no matter what measures they took. Which I can't imagine living like that. That's so sad. He was going through chemo and he was losing his hair and he was losing his weight and he was having a really tough time, but he thought he could still beat this. And again, this is 1982, so they didn't really know yet what it was about or what would happen. And unfortunately, in March of 1984, he did die of liver failure due to complications of AIDS.
See, that's the thing that is just so wild about it, right? Because it's not even the AIDS itself.
Yeah, it's like the complications.
It's usually like, yeah, complications. Like Freddie Mercury died from complications of AIDS, but he's remembered for just having AIDS.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, just wild.
And I think and it's because, the virus just ravishes your immune system. And so anything you get can be extremely detrimental. He died in March of 1984. And that same year, the American Journal of Medicine published an article called Cluster Cases of the Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. And in this article, they studied the sexual contacts of gay men with AIDS to, quote, determine if their histories were consistent with the hypothesis that AIDS was caused by an infection agent. The paper said, if the infectious agent hypothesis is true, patient O may be an example of a carrier of such an agent. He had had sexual contact with 8 other AIDS patients and was the possible source of AIDS for at least 3 of them. 2 of these 3 men had been his partners before he had overt signs of Kaposi sarcoma. Now, this sentence was an extremely small part of this huge study. And this sentence is what caused Gaëtan to be vilified. Thankfully, this all happened after he had passed, so he didn't have to go through knowing about all this, but obviously his family did. So, what happened? Patient O was supposed to be the letter O for out of California. Somewhere along the way, as people were like retyping and like, taking quotes from it and that kind of stuff, it got changed to a 0, making everyone think that Gaëtan Dugas was patient 0, the man who started the
Oh,
AIDS epidemic.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yes. One paper called him the monster who gave us AIDS.
Wow.
Yeah.
You cannot singularly track down where something like this could have started.
Right.
There's no way.
Yeah. And people were making it seem like he was purposely spreading AIDS. Like he knew what it was, he knew what he was doing, and he was purposely spreading it. One book that was written by Randy Shilts in 1987 called him a sociopath. This was a best-selling book, and the media ran with this. Gaëtan became the face of the AIDS epidemic. Some papers even said that he was singularly responsible for first bringing HIV to America, all because of a typo. In the documentary, William Darrow, who was part of the CDC AIDS task force at the time, the one that had actually started talking to Gaëtan, recalled his surprise when fellow researchers began mentioning patient 0. He said, "Who are you talking about?" to his colleague. And he said, "Come on, Darrow, you're the one who told us about him." Astonished, Mr. Darrow twigged what had happened. "I told you about patient O, the out of California case." "Oh, that was an O," the researcher said. "We thought it was a 0." But
Are
by
you
then,
freaking kidding me?
no. But by then, the media had already run with it.
You know, the thing that like really pisses me off about it is the fact that they're like, oh yeah, he knew what he was doing. He knew that he was spreading this. How would he know what he was doing if the doctors didn't even know what was going on?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah. And later, it was Schultz who correctly figured out that the former patient 57, so that's actually what number he was, and patient O was Dugas. So he was kind of the one that put 2 and 2 together and then called him a sociopath.
Oh.
So I do want to say that the author Schultz, he did a lot for the AIDS epidemic. He raised a lot of money for it and all this kind of stuff. But one paper or the creator of the documentary said that much of what Schultz accomplished was heroic, but he is guilty of creating this vampiric version of Gaëtan, of twisting reality into this monster who went out deliberately infecting people. And I firmly believe that this was not the case. And he also said, this is one of the great ironies. Had he not been so helpful and cooperative, none of this would have happened.
Okay, whoa.
Like, had he been helpful, had he not been so
No,
helpful and cooperative, he wouldn't have been made to be the villain.
I know, that's what I'm
Oh,
saying.
okay.
Like, are you fucking kidding me? The man was dying. Maybe I'm not understanding.
Yeah, so he is saying that like it's ironic because he was so helpful and yet they still
Oh,
made him into the villain.
oh, I thought it was the other way around.
No, yeah, no, he's saying it as like a
Oh,
he
I
was
thought
so
he was
helpful and they still did this to him.
okay. I thought it was he wasn't being very helpful,
Mm.
and that's why we vilified him. But I was like, but he gave them his notebook.
Yeah, no, he was saying like had he not been so helpful, they wouldn't have ever
Okay,
had that information and he would have never been the villain. But because he wanted to try and help what was going on, he they vilified him.
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No,
that
you're fine.
was silly, confusing.
um, oh, there was an but I think that was my first one.
N-
No? Oh no.
It's like every other sentence.
Is it really? Oh no.
That's hilarious that you literally you said right when we came back from our conversation
Did I
about you saying
really? I tried so hard.
We're
Okay,
gonna count them.
do it. Let me know. So how bad I am.
I could have done that the last episode.
So researchers actually come to find out believe that about 100 to 300,000 people were living with HIV prior to 1980. And the fact that his actual number was patient 57 means that there was 56 other people ahead of him that they had talked to that knew about that had AIDS possibly.
Exactly. So like what
Yeah.
what's
And they believe that they can trace the virus back to 1959 with a man who was in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So they think they can trace that virus all the way back to then. I don't know if he was the one that they think maybe brought it to America. I'm not sure, but I know it was really bad in Haiti at first. And that was one of the populations that they said were most at risk were Haitians, as well as, the gay community and stuff like that. And thankfully, he has since been exonerated. Obviously, he was not patient zero, but I think it doesn't really matter to me anyway, because even if he was patient zero, it doesn't matter. Like he couldn't have known what he it's not like he was out there, purposely spreading. It was so early. He couldn't have known
well and
what
that's
was
the
happening or what he was doing.
yeah, that's the thing. Like nobody it could lay I'm pretty sure it lays dormant for a while,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so how are you supposed to know? It's like, how they say that you're most contagious with a cold before you show
Yeah.
symptoms,
Yeah.
right? So you can accidentally spread a cold.
Mm-hmm.
Like people get sick all the time.
Yeah. So he was in patient zero, obviously. But again, even if he was, it wouldn't have mattered. He was not the vampiric version that the media wanted people to believe. And his name has been cleared, thankfully, and his friends and family are very thankful for that. Um, People now are still living with HIV and some with AIDS. It is obviously easier to control now. if they get on the right medication. But that time between in the 80s to 96, it was a very, very scary time. And it has impacted the gay community to this day. And they were interviewing some of the older gentlemen on there, and they were saying it was just like, one guy said that his friend called him and he was like busy. So he's like, hey, let me call you back. And like he forgot to call him back or something like that. And a week later, he died. He's like, every time you turned around, someone was gone or disappeared, as they said, because they had passed away from AIDS. It was a terrifying time for them.
Wow.
And that is the story of Gaëtan Dugas.
Well, thank you. I am honestly, I'm really glad that you told that story because, everybody talks about AIDS like they know what it is, kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
like, obviously, the only thing I think of when I think of AIDS is that it was within that community, Freddie Mercury, that kind of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
it was interesting to hear more of a background on it
Yeah.
and going through the different stages.
It was interesting. One of the things, and I didn't put it in here, but one of the things that was just kind of showed how it was viewed. There was a huge news story about how Princess Diana shook a man's hand that had HIV. And that was like a
Nice.
huge story.
Good.
And after that, I guess she became a pretty um, strong, like,
Advocate.
yes, thank you. Advocate for
You're welcome.
HIV/AIDS. Yes. Yeah. So,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Okay, well, I can't believe that we did this week.
Yours pretty bad too.
Yeah, but in kind of like a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we're really bad at these transitions. I don't know what else to do. But basically, I'm just gonna move along to my story.
Okay.
So I used the New York Times and this is a weird one, understandinganimalresearch.org.
Okay.
So I am going to be discussing the thalidomide tragedy. Um, um,
It's hard.
The Food and Drug Administration urgently notified its field offices in July of 1962 about a task it described as one of the most important we have had in a long time. Overseas, thalidomide, a medication commonly used for drowsiness, morning sickness, and other conditions, was linked to thousands of babies being born with serious abnormalities in Germany, England, and other nations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The problem was that this drug was tested on animals and was deemed safe. However, the product was never tested on pregnant animals and their embryos.
Oh. And then they gave it to pregnant women.
Yeah,
Oh, gosh.
yeah. There was no control group either, and there was no mention of how long the course of treatment had lasted. Additionally, there was no assessment of the concentration of thalidomide in the patient's tissues or blood. The papers published in 1956 on animal experiments and on the clinical experiences with the thalidomide, I don't know why that's such a hard word to say, have so little scientific value that, in my opinion, they should not have been accepted for print, said would you kind lens.
That's not a sentence.
It's a person's name. Widukind.
Oh. I don't know.
Lentz, one of the physicians who looked into thalidomide in the wake of the disaster. So he basically said that the papers published didn't have really any scientific value backing them up.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. The federal government was investigating what had occurred in the United States and how many infants were impacted. Although 20,000 Americans may have received thalidomide in the 1950s and 60s as part of two clinical trials run by American pharma manufacturers Richardson Merrill and Smith, Kline, and French. So this medication was not approved in the United States until the medication was not approved in the United States in the 1960s, but it was being distributed in the 50s and 60s.
Oh my gosh.
Here is the FDA investigation story as told through a selection of the more than 1,300 pages of records that were received in response to a FOIA request. Okay. This these articles were great because they had so much stuff in them
Yeah.
to back them up and like clippings of different articles and papers. It was great. So basically, this is what they said. On August 1st, 1962, President John F. Kennedy issued a warning saying, "Every woman in this country, I think, must be aware that it's most important that they check their medicine cabinet and that they do not take this drug."
Wow.
So thankfully, he was on top of it.
Yeah.
Only a few days previously, the Food and Drug Administration had told its inspectors to speak with every doctor who had received thalidomide and look into any possible baby injury. They said in a report, in view of the great public interest in the situation, this assignment is one of the most important that we have had in a long time, and every effort must be made to contact the physicians within the prescribed period and submit the report to the district so that one copy of each can then be forwarded to BFA no later than Thursday morning, August 2nd. So August 1st, John F. Kennedy made this statement, and they're saying on August 1st he made the statement, and on August 2nd this shit has to be dealt with.
Okay.
So it's nice. It's like
Yeah.
they made a mistake, a huge mistake, but they're trying to
Mm-hmm.
rectify it, thankfully.
Yeah.
Inspectors quickly realized how challenging their work would be once they went to work.
Oh no.
Since there were no cell phones
Yeah.
or email in those days.
I often forget that, like, when I watch something that's older, I'm like, why didn't they just call them? Oh
Yeah.
yeah, they don't have cell phones.
Yeah. They didn't even have email.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like, it's crazy to think how new that stuff is
Yeah.
in
Well,
our time.
did you have much time without the internet, or was it kind of always around by when you were born?
Uh, well, I think the internet's been around for quite a while, but I don't remember having a computer till we were like a little bit older.
Yeah. Let me see. Let's see. What year was the internet invented? It
I think it was like the 80s.
was invented by Al Gore, you know.
Who's that?
My Americans will get that joke. Uh, January 1st, 1983 is considered the official birthday of the internet.
Yeah, so it's always been around for me because I was born 10 years later.
Well, I know, but like, I don't think anybody had it until later.
Yeah, we started with like dial up, obviously, and it's the most annoying sound in the world.
Because I remember, because I'm an old bitch, a time
Yeah, you're almost 40.
before the internet. I
That's
know.
weird.
I know. I remember like I don't know. And I remember a time before cell phones too. I actually remember my friend got the first cell phone of our group when we were in high school. And we
Oh
thought
my
she was
gosh.
so cool. And I remember like before so when cell phones first came out, they didn't have like GPS or anything. So I remember
Yeah.
having to go to mapquest.com and print out your
Oh,
directions
good old MapQuest.
and ask Jeeves, the original Google.
It is just wild to me that, we've been able to make movies for as long as we have, but we didn't have internet.
Yeah, yeah.
Just weird. But anyways, so basically, because they didn't have cell phones or email, a lot of doctors were away from their practices for weeks at a time. So they couldn't get a hold of them to let them know about what was going on.
Okay.
Others, unfortunately, refused to talk or insisted that they had not distributed thalidomide. The German manufacturer of thalidomide, gonna fuck this up, uh, Chemie Gruental, pulled
Sounds
its
perfect.
pulled its product off the market in Germany in November 1961, according to reports that it was linked to infants being born without arms or legs.
Oh.
Yeah. Richardson Merrill, a Cincinnati company seeking to export thalidomide to the United States, was informed of this action. So a whole German manufacturer pulled it out. But shit keeps going.
And Meryl was like, nah, man, let's ship it to the US.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
But despite the fact that thalidomide had already been withdrawn off pharmacy shelves worldwide, Richardson Merrill claimed in this letter to American doctors who took part in its clinical studies that there was still no positive proof of a connection. So part of this letter says, Dear Doctor, on December 5th, 1961, we advised you of the possible relationship of congenital malformations observed abroad in offsprings of certain patients who had taken thalidomide, which was called Kevadon in Canada, early in pregnancy. This letter is to summarize the current status. There still is no positive proof of a causal relationship between the use of thalidomide during pregnancy and malformations in the newborn. Reports are now appearing in the medical literature indicating only that thalidomide was employed in certain cases where malformation developed. The research necessary to determine whether or not such malformation may indeed be related to the drug is continuing, and because of the complexity of the problem, will require considerable time.
If there's even a chance, you gotta pull that shit.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, can you imagine? I just want to make money. So like,
Well, I mean, they still do it today. I mean, Big Pharma, everybody's complaining about them, but you look at like how much they charge for freaking insulin. People
yeah.
die and have to
Yeah.
like conserve their insulin because they can't afford it. And it's like takes pennies to make.
Yeah. I know. It's ridiculous. It was not until a month later that Richardson Merrill withdrew its application to market thalidomide in the United States.
Oh my gosh.
But the business was still defending thalidomide's reputation to American doctors in September.
Oh my gosh. Get over it, dude. Find a new drug.
In a letter, a corporate executive stated, thoughtful reanalysis is now taking place all over the world as emotional reaction to early press reports and begin to subside. Federal investigators found proof that thalidomide, which was to be marketed as Kevadon, was distributed among physicians and family members, despite the fact that it was still illegal in the U.S.
Oh my gosh. That's insane.
Inspectors provided information about two cases from North Carolina in this FDA note from August 1962. The text is revealing despite the identities being redacted. So, in one instance, a doctor had been prescribing thalidomide to his wife while also using it himself. The doctor also noted peripheral neuritis, a side effect of thalidomide that causes nerve discomfort, along with his wife's loss of vision.
Oh my gosh.
The second report is considerably more concerning. It claims that a registered nurse gave birth to a child who was born without arms or legs, and that as a qualified nurse, she may have had access to the item. So, by September 1962, investigators had come to the conclusion that Richardson Merrill had improperly promoted thalidomide prior to its approval, even by the lenient standards of the time. Dr. Ralph W. Weilerstein, an associate medical director of the FDA, reported on his observations on a visit to a Richardson Merrill division that same month. The FDA also looked into Smith, Kline, and French. The firm had a lesser trial and came to the conclusion that it had acted legally. Bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
The memos revealed that Richardson Merrill utilized many of the same strategies as contemporary pharmaceutical companies to market their goods. These strategies included getting renowned physicians to endorse thalidomide and assisting the researchers in writing scientific articles, almost to the extent of ghostwriting them.
Oh my gosh. That's
So,
insane.
yeah, and this was in a memo that Dr. Willerstein had wrote. And he referred to the physicians who took part in the clinical experiment as investigators in this memo.
Oh my gosh.
FDA officials intensified their investigation into Richardson Merrill in October 1962. They instructed the field offices to gather affidavits from physicians who had testified in the trial, search local vital records offices for reports of unusual births, and look for former detail men or salesmen for Richardson Merrill who might be willing to talk. The memo stated this is a priority assignment and must be handled with dispatch, which is with haste.
With haste.
With haste. Even in situations where there was proof that thalidomide had hurt a child, the FDA started to drop cases that did not assist it to establish a case against Richardson Merrill. Morrell, I don't know. I think it's Merrill.
I think it's
Whatever.
around two, but can you say that again?
Um, so they said that it was a priority assignment and it had to be handled with haste.
Yeah.
But even in situations where there was proof that even in situations where there was proof that thalidomide had hurt a child, the FDA started to drop cases that didn't assist it to establish a case against Richardson Merrill.
Okay.
When the mother's doctor was not on the company's list of participating physicians, for example, the investigators in some cases stopped their inquiry, which is bullshit because they could have
Yeah.
illegally obtained the drug. It wasn't legal for forever.
Yeah.
In another instance, a child had been harmed by this drug, but since the woman's father had been prescribed the drug and then given it to his daughter, the
Oh,
case was dropped.
I did, I don't think that's right because even though it
Yep,
was illegally obtained, but like the drug is still the issue,
yep,
you know?
I know. In July 1963, FDA investigators forwarded their conclusions to the Department of Justice for possible criminal charges. Richardson Merrill broke the law on 24 counts, according to the agency attorneys,
Wow.
including marketing an unapproved medicine and asserting its safety.
Oh, good.
The Department of Justice, however, came to the conclusion in September of 1964 that criminal prosecution is neither warranted nor desirable.
Oh,
Just bullshit.
why?
I will read this to you. This was part of a letter written by Herbert J. Miller, who is the Assistant Attorney General.
Okay.
And in this letter, it says, considering Kevadon's background, the general language of the then governing regulation source, like the old typewriter, the fact that thalidomide had been licensed for distribution in several European countries and Canada as a safe hypnotic, and the fact that Merrill distributed it in the United States, apparently only to physicians of high professional standing, it seems doubtful that a court or jury would find the distribution program to have been a criminal violation of the regulations. It is also noted that it would be difficult to prove that Kevadon's distribution in the United States resulted in grave harm. As far as known, only one malformed baby has been born in the United States as a result of its mother's use of Kevadon. And there is a critical error in this letter. And in the margins, you can see somebody had written not correct
Oh.
about there only being one malformed baby being born.
Oh.
But it was too late. No charges would be brought against Richardson Merrill.
That's so shitty.
Yeah. It was later tested on animals that were pregnant, and abnormalities were identified in these offspring. Before a 1972 Sunday Times investigation revealed the real facts, compensation for those affected took many years to be decided upon, and the amount was meager.
Mm.
The level of compensation for individuals impacted increased tenfold as a result.
Oh.
In May 1963, what is Right Honorable? Is that what it is? RT?
What?
It's RT Honorable Kenneth Robinson. RT.
I don't know.
Retired?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. Anyways, he was the Minister of Health. And he stated that the House and the public suddenly woke up to the fact that any drug manufacturer could market any product, however inadequately tested as to its efficacy and safety, and the public was almost uniquely unprotected in this aspect.
Wow.
There hasn't been a comparable problem with prescription medications harming unborn infants in the 60 years since thalidomide was removed from the market in the UK. Additionally, there hasn't been any fatalities in new medication clinical trials, which is amazing.
Yeah.
The regulatory requirements for animal safety testing have safeguarded human test subjects and eliminated a great number of potentially harmful substances. I still don't believe in animal testing. I just need to put that out there.
Agree.
I just have to make that known.
Yeah. Agree.
What about the drug thalidomide itself? Further investigation has revealed that it has therapeutic effects in leprosy, where it can eliminate all signs and symptoms if the patient continues to take the medication, as well as in various cancers and AIDS-related illnesses.
Oh.
That's really funny that our story is kind of interconnected
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And obviously, it cannot be recommended for women who are pregnant or may become pregnant. So, that is my story
That's
on the
awful.
thalidomide tragedy.
Do you know? I don't know if you had said this and I missed it or if you just didn't know. Do you know? I don't know if this could even be known, but the number of babies that were born malformed because of this?
More than 10,000 children.
Oh my gosh. Poor
Yeah.
things.
I didn't mention it, but more than 10,000 children.
Wow.
And I'm going to share my screen. Can I
Okay.
share my screen? Yeah, I'm gonna. No, you have to enable.
Try now.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, oh man, I just want this page to like. Sorry for everybody that's just listening. but I'm going to show Ashley pictures. Look at these babies. These poor sweet babies.
Can you imagine the mom guilt that
Yeah.
these poor mothers felt? It's not their fault, and I'm not saying it's their fault, but just the guilt they must have felt.
Like, look at this.
It's so sad.
Oh, this was that scene from Call the Midwife.
Oh.
Yeah, where their baby was born with like very short limbs like this,
Mm-hmm.
where the limbs are basically just like little little things.
Poor
It's
little
just so
guys.
sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Especially for something that could have been completely preventable.
yeah, 100%. And because this company just like pushed and pushed and pushed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, um, I don't feel like doing any jokes this week.
That's
I
pretty.
feel like it was a very heavy,
Yeah.
and I know we typically do jokes at the end because our episodes are heavy, but I just feel like we
It's
need to
not
just let this
appropriate
one,
this time.
yeah, we just need
Yeah.
to let this one rest today. So
Yeah.
we apologize, but we hope you enjoyed our stories. We enjoyed bringing them to you.
We did.
Yeah.
And you can find us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Patreon.
And if you would like to rate and review us, you can do so on Apple Podcast and Spotify.
Thanks for listening, and we look forward to bringing you 2 new stories next week.
Bye.
Bye.